What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Behind the Facade. I'm your host, Gavin J. Gallagher, and on this podcast, I explore the mental and emotional game often playing out subconsciously both in your mind and the mind of everyone else in the real estate or property investment market. The key to success in this game is to master your mindset and behavior, to take control of your thoughts, your emotions, and, most importantly, your ego. Welcome to the show. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode, and it's been a pretty eventful week here in Dublin. Most of you will know exactly what I'm talking about, but I guess there's the odd international listener who may not be aware of the events of last Thursday. Now, I'm going to go into those events and my thoughts about them today, but I'm also going to be talking about some notable news stories that I've come across in the last week or so. And these news stories are kind of what I would consider to be maybe red flags towards some trouble ahead in terms of the economy and in particular the property market. And so we're going to get into some of that today. And I'll begin by saying that Thursday the 23rd, which is the day of all of these events, was actually the day of my father's 30th anniversary since the night that he died in Dublin. And it was a pretty eventful and impactful day, just leaving aside all of the news stories. But actually, you wake up 30 years since your dad died, and there's, you have quite a lot of feelings about it. And it's an impactful moment because, first of all, I am now 6 years older than my father ever lived. And he died at the age of 45. I'm now 51. And that alone is it's kind of a poignant moment when you realize that you're now older than your dad, and your dad, who you looked upon as a kind of figure of wisdom and experience and stuff. I now have 6 years more experience than he ever had. And so it is kind of an interesting moment. And so I went down and I visited my dad's grave, and I was, reflecting on 30 years. It's kind of a crazy thought. I've spent the last 30 years figuring shit out, building experience, making mistakes, having some successes as well, obviously. But you've got this big kind of list of accomplishments and challenges and all of the things that kind of have happened in the space of 30 years. And that's a lot of experience. And it's experience that my dad didn't get to share any of it. And so I kind of think about my own impact on my own kids, and I think about all that. So obviously kind of a moving moment. And I was actually going to do a whole episode on this, and I was going to go into more detail. Perhaps I'll do it at a later date. But really what I was going to go into the next 30 years, like what do I want the next 30 years to stand for? And while I was in the middle of kind of thinking about all this stuff, the events of Thursday took center stage. So today's episode is more about the events than my poor old late father. Seamus Gallagher was his name, and he was my hero. But we're going to be talking about some other heroes today on this. Now, I'm sure every one of you knows what's happened in the last week, but if you're not aware, I'm just going to reiterate, some of the events. Perhaps some of you international listeners are unaware, or you didn't hear much about it, so you don't really know, but it's a very scary set of events that took place last week for two separate reasons. And the first one is there was at lunchtime, just after the schools finished. This is for the very young schools, the kind of play schools and creche and things like that. There was a bunch of kids standing outside this school on Parnell Street. It's called Gaelscoil Choláiste Muir. And these little group of kiddies, basically, and I have a 3-year-old and a 7-year-old. So, this age is very, I'm very aware of this age group. And this, what can only be described as a deranged lunatic, walked up to them and basically started randomly attacking these kids with a knife. And he managed to go and stab 3 children before passers-by intervened and tried to prevent it. But in that time, he stabbed a little 5-year-old girl. Now, 5 years old, like the picture of innocence And like, I have a 7-year-old now. It's not long ago she was 5, and like, I cannot imagine this attack that took place. And anyway, this poor little girl is in a very serious condition in hospital. She got stabbed multiple times by this lunatic, and she, by all accounts, they were giving her CPR on the street, trying to keep her alive because she lost so much blood and things like that. I mean, it's absolutely horrendous. And for me, it's like, when you have kids, this hits hard, really, really hard. Now, thankfully, the two other children, one of them was 6 years of age and one of them was 5 years, and they got stabbed as well, but it wasn't as serious. But this poor little girl was the center of the attack, and she got stabbed multiple times, and she's really, really sick. So like, my heart goes out to her, her family. I'm just like, I've been profoundly impacted by this event, and it's primarily because, like, I have 5 kids of my own, and I can just imagine what I would feel if this happened to one of my kids. Like, that evening I could not sleep thinking about the events of the day, and like, tiny innocent kids, it's hard to imagine. And the worst thing about it is, my wife was actually in the city. She was in doing a couple of bits and pieces just beside Parnell Street, and where the attack took place, and she left just 30 minutes before the attack took place. So she's a bit shaken up by it as well. And I got to talk about, like, let's leave aside for a moment the children and the terrible thing that's happened, but we have to talk about these heroes that jumped in to assist. Now, you kind of think to yourself, these innocent little kids getting attacked, like, who wouldn't step in? But if a guy is wielding a big knife, there will be people who will look at that and will hesitate. There'll be other people that won't even hesitate, won't even bat an eyelid. They're just straight in to prevent it. And the first person on the scene was a 30-year-old creche teacher, probably working in the same school. I don't know a lot of details because a lot of this isn't public yet. But she was stabbed multiple times in the process of trying to protect the children. And so she's in hospital. Her condition is reported as very serious but stable, which is better than the critical condition the little girl is in. Also, another man jumped in. He's in his 40s, and he was also received multiple injuries. And so he is stable, serious but stable as well. And there was 2 other guys who are heroes. One, a 17-year-old trainee chef from France. So this young guy jumped into the middle of it and got involved in protecting and pushing the lunatic away. And also a 43-year-old Brazilian, I think he was a Deliveroo driver, so he goes around on his bicycle or on a bike or whatever. He jumped in and he managed to knock this guy out or down with his bicycle helmet. And so, or his bike helmet. Like, all of these guys, if it wasn't for them, like, you just don't know who else would have been hit. Like, there was a multiple children standing around, so this could have been multiple children rather than just 3 in serious condition, if not worse. And so, I mean, it's beyond belief that this took place. And thank you, I think we, as a person with a platform here, this podcast, we have an audience. You guys are listening. Like, what can we do to help recognize these people, and what can we do to support the children, and in particular that little girl? Like, that little girl is in critical condition. Like, I'm praying that she will survive, because that is not a given at this moment in time. But if she does survive, she is going to need therapy. She is going to need mental and physical therapy for many, many years, I imagine, because of, like, a 5-year-old girl. Like, this trauma is just going to, scar her if we're not careful. And so I'm going to be launching a fundraiser for this. Like, if you want to support the fundraiser, send me a message, let me know. But I really want to do something for the kids, and I really want to do something for to recognize the bravery of the people who jumped in and got involved and like put themselves in harm's way in order to protect the kids. I'm thinking of doing some sort of, I don't know, I don't really know, but I'm thinking like some sort of an award for them, just so that they get recognized. Because, you hope that you would react in the same way, but you just don't know. I mean, over the years, I've seen things like fights breaking out outside of a nightclub and things like that. And you kind of, sometimes you might think, oh, I think I'll steer clear of that. Like, some people don't think like that. They kind of jump into the middle of it and they try to break it up. And in the process, one of my school friends, I haven't talked about this ever before, but one of my school friends, a guy called Simon Barrett, I went to school with Simon, and he was a bit of a crazy kid, and I kind of used to hold him responsible for getting me held back a year because he was such a distraction and such a messer. But Simon was, I think he was traveling, doing kind of a year in Australia or whatever when he was around 19 or 20. I can't remember exactly what age he was. But a fight broke out outside of a nightclub, and he ran over to break up the fight. And he didn't realize that one of the people in the fight had a knife, and they stabbed him in the heart, and he died there and then of his injuries. And so when you hear things like that, it might make you think twice. But I think with little children involved, anybody would jump in to save them. But just these guys, I think they need to be recognized in some way. And I'm sure they will be, but I feel so profoundly impacted by this that I want to do something for them myself. I want to actually be responsible for fundraising, and I want to be responsible for finding some way to recognize them. Now, the events of the day, they were dreadful. They were like, it's bad enough that you have to actually acknowledge that something as bad as and horrific as that took place. But what happened next is just beyond belief. And it is as I think they're being described as the lunatic fringe or the hooligan fringe, but a huge crowd of inner city. I mean, I don't even know. Nobody really knows all of their identities, but a ton of people headed into town with hoods over disguising their faces and stuff, and decided to riot. And basically what they were doing, from what we've heard, they were attacking the city as a way to protest against the fact that the lunatic that stabbed these children was an immigrant. He was, by all accounts, he was from some part of Africa. And these guys decided, let's use that as an excuse to go and ransack and destroy and loot and burn out the city. And it's absolutely, I mean, if you guys go on social media, I'm sure you've seen a lot of the images and stuff like that, but we have friends in the city that live in the city, and I had one of my friends, his son was graduating from Trinity College, and it was his night out, to enjoy. That was all cancelled. The kids that were in Trinity, they couldn't leave Trinity because it was too dangerous to go out, and so they had to stay the night in the college and things like that. Absolute chaos. These looters, they broke open tons of shops. Funny enough, they were all sports shops that sell tracksuits and runners and things like that. So, it says a lot. But these guys set fire to buses, set fire to the Lewis tram line. They set fire to cars. They actually attacked the police cars and burnt out the police cars. They attacked the policemen. It looked like a war zone. We've all become accustomed to seeing the images from Ukraine and all of this kind of stuff. But to see your own city, your own capital city being burnt out, and the shops being looted, hooligans jumping on the top of cars that are police cars and things like that. It's just absolutely crazy. And it's scary. It's scary to think that these people, that's all the excuse they needed to go on this rampage. And all because they have some sort of an objection to immigrants and the policy of allowing immigrants into this country. Now, Who were two of those heroes I mentioned already? 17-year-old French man and a 43-year-old Brazilian man. Both immigrants, both heroes in the process of saving those children from the attacker. Nobody's, those rioters, they're complaining about immigrants, and yet two of the four were immigrants themselves. And this is the irony of the thing. The damage to the city of Dublin is profound. And I don't mean in terms of the physical damage. What I mean, cars and buses and all that, they can be replaced. They were like washing down the streets and, cleaning up the burn marks and all that the next day. I'm talking about the reputation of the city. I'm talking like the news that went out covering these events was a global news event. It was on CNN, Sky News, BBC News, like all of the big broadcasters were covering these events, and they were calling it the far right, as in, in America you've got the far right. This was the Irish far right. It was not the Irish far right. This was a bunch of crazed lunatics that were, like you see the football hooligans that arrive into international football contests and start wrecking the place. That's the kind of people we're talking about. We're not talking about a political right, although they may have right-wing views. I don't think it does any justice to call them right, the far right. Think about the damage that they have done to our city in terms of the tourism, the visitors that visit, the shops, the transport, all of the damage, all of the cleanup that has to be done. Think about the people that were thinking of coming to Ireland for Christmas and have decided, you know what, I think we'll stay home. Think about the amount of American visitors that come in and that are critical for our economy because they fly in, and when they fly in, they spend money in our shops, in our businesses, restaurants, hotels, all that. Our city needs these travelers, these foreigners that are coming in. And when they see these kind of news headlines, they are just going to say, you know what, let's just give it a miss this year. Maybe we'll do it next year if things cool off. But it is going to damage the reputation of both our city and our country. And like, what is going on at the moment? Like, there seems to be this polarization on all sides. If you look at, just following politics in general, any type of politics, whether it's the US, whether it's the Netherlands, whether it's Hungary, whether it's the UK, like all of these countries, they seem to have this left versus right thing happening at the moment. And positions are hardening, and nobody seems capable any longer of having a polite sort of debate on issues. Like, if I disagree with you, does that mean I am your enemy and that you need to like destroy me? No. But it seems to be the way people are hardening their positions. Like, all you have to do is watch the US presidential election stuff with Donald Trump and stuff like that. It's absolutely crazy. You just have to look at what's going on between Russia and Ukraine at the moment. Look at what's happening in the Middle East at the moment. Like, where does it all end? This is the concern that I have. It seems to me that the further we get away from the memories of World War One and World War Two, like anybody that survived World War One or World War Two, they're dead now, or very few of them remain. And so those memories are critical towards keeping some sort of stability. And the more comfortable we get in our society, it seems the more hardened that we get in our political views. Whereas if you had experienced World War One or World War Two, and you saw 17 and 18-year-olds being sent off to battle and losing arms and legs, if they're lucky, coming home with, a limb missing or something like that, or deranged from, shell shock or whatever it was, like 70 million people died in World War Two. 70 million people. Think about that. That's the entire population of the UK. Every single one of them wiped out, and that would be that is the result of World War Two. Plus, like, cities all over Europe destroyed, leveled, flattened. So you kind of think to yourself, you can see why after that people kind of were grateful for what they had. They were grateful for the way things were. There wasn't such division as there is now. So I just feel that this, you've got to, this goes beyond political views and stuff. This is down to your mindset. Like, are you a person that reacts instantly to anger, or are you a person who is conscious enough of their thoughts to control the situation? If somebody does something to you that is, rude or offensive or anything like that, do you fly off the handle? Do you like instantly respond and attack back? Or can you control yourself? Can you actually think to yourself, you know what? Who knows what's going on with this person? But like, clearly that's an offensive term, but do I have to respond and get angry to that term? Perhaps not. Anyway, let's get into some other news. And this other news is about the economy and some red flags that I'm seeing that we need to talk about. Now, before we do, I thought I'd mention today, I'm working on restoring the Monday upload of this podcast. And I'm recording this Sunday, the 26th of November. And the idea is you'll be listening to this tomorrow morning, Monday, at the 5 a.m. upload time that I used to have. The purpose of that is just to try to get back on track. I've done a number of interviews in the last couple of days. And so we now have quite a few people in the can, as we like to say. So you're going to have interviews, but you're also going to have, the monologues that I give like this coming up. Anyway, let's get on to the news, the other news. And it's really kind of shocking to have read it in the last couple of days. But I saw the newspaper headline that Johnny Ronan has had his company put into receivership by AIB and Bank of Ireland. Now, Johnny Ronan, to those of you who are unaware of his name, if you're an Irish property person or like my age, you absolutely know who this is. This was one of the biggest property developers of the last 50 years. He's now 70 in the next couple of days. He's turning 70 years of age. He has a portfolio worth 130 million, and it includes the historic Bewley's Cafe on Grafton Street, which one of his most prized possessions. And he owns lots of other buildings around. Like there's the Treasury building on Grand Canal Street, and he owns various other properties around the place. But he was one of the big ones. He used to run a company called Treasury Holdings with another man called Richard Barrett. And the two of them were a formidable force, and they created massive, massive deals. And back in the early 2000s, they were one of the biggest names. I remember Johnny Ronan. I know Johnny. I've met him multiple times, but I wouldn't say he'd know exactly who I am. But we were chatting at one stage, and he used to drive around in a Maybach. And it used to be quite funny seeing this Maybach trying to find a parking space on a narrow street. He also had a Hummer, one of the big American Hummers that are, they're about 8 feet wide, so they could barely fit down most narrow lanes in Dublin. So quite a flamboyant guy, and really, really well known for the office sector. And that's why I know him, is because I'm in the office sector myself. He would be a guy that had a real reputation for the most incredible office buildings. He always built really, really high-end office buildings. And so why has he gone into receivership? Well, there's an awful lot of, I suppose, public relations going on here. They said that they've invited the guys to kind of enter into receivership and stuff like that. It's a consensual restructuring is what they're saying. But I can't imagine this was consensual, other than being allowed to call it that for the old press release. But Ronan Real Estate Group, Ronan Group Real Estate, RGRE, that is a development business that is actually continues to perform, according to them, perform strongly. But RGRE invited Bank of Ireland and AIB to appoint a receiver to help win the refinancing. And this will be interesting to see. Like these guys, at one stage, they had 5,900 housing units in planning, and they were just massive. In fact, I can remember they bought in the UK, in London, they owned the Battersea Power Station at one stage, and they had just taken control of it. All of a sudden, then 2008 happened, and they lost control of that. But really, very, very colourful character, and incredibly successful developer. And so to hear that he's gone into receivership is just kind of staggering, and it marks, like, I won't say it's the Lehman moment, but I would say that it certainly, when I read it, it kind of felt a little bit like a Lehman moment for the Irish property market. And I know if you've been listening for a while, you've been hearing me say the office sector is really struggling at the moment. And why is it struggling? We've talked about it recently. Struggling because COVID changed a lot of habits. People were working from home. Everyone prior to this, everyone in management would have said work from home and remote work is impossible. The experiment was forced upon them, and it actually worked in many cases for some technology companies. Now, I know a number of firms that are bringing people back 5 days a week. I know a number of firms who swear it's destroying their company culture and things like that. But what it has done is it's shaken up the market to the extent that real estate developers that do these big, office buildings, that sometimes they'll build speculatively, and they'll try to kind of get the thing, get a tenant before the financing is complete. But if they don't do that, they might start the building just having a hypothesis that the market will continue going strong or whatever. And then suddenly these events come out of nowhere. Now, I've talked before about the 4 E's and the fact that these things can suddenly come and take you down without you even anticipating them at all. Events and the economy are the two that can kind of take you externally. Now, it's not just Johnny Ronan who we're talking about tonight. We're also talking about another story that I've seen, which is another red flag in my opinion, and the owner of Brown Thomas and Arnott's is a tycoon, or was, I should say, an Austrian property tycoon by the name Rene Benko. And he is one of these really flamboyant, colourful characters that are very well known. He's only in his 40s, and yet he managed to create this really massive group that owned, it was sprawling property empire. It owned luxury hotels, it owned luxury brands. I kind of feel like when I read about him that he was kind of like one of these people that wanted to be Bernard Arnault, the person who owns LVMH. And like, to give you a list of some of his properties, his highest profile luxury properties was, for example, the Chrysler Building in New York. He owned the London department store Selfridges, and it owns Brown Thomas and Arnott's in Ireland. In Berlin, he owned all of this really expensive streets, these entire streets that basically have all of the luxury stores. And his group was called Signa, and Signa had a huge amount of debt in order to fund all of this. And in the same way we're talking about Johnny Ronan there, a lot of these guys, they have a hypothesis, and the hypothesis is that things are going to go strong. The debt will be low interest rate debt, and it'll be like that for several years. And we'll go and we'll scale up, and we'll get to this huge size where we dominate the market. And then we'll sell off some stuff, and we'll pay down our debt, and then we'll get ourselves, and we'll add value and all this. And, this is the kind of thing that lots and lots of people have been doing over the years. And sometimes it works. You'll have some people, they pull it off. Their hypothesis turns out to be true. I think there's a certain amount of luck associated with that. But in other cases, you get yourself into that situation where you've got a huge amount of debt, and then suddenly the market shifts, conditions change, and you're in a situation where you're now trying to figure out, okay, I need to get a huge partner to come in and finance this and help me finance. And as it turns out, he brought in somebody to help him, overcome these debt problems. And the problem is that the person he brought in was this Thai billionaire, I believe. And sure enough, this Rene could not fix his financing problems. And so his Thai partner is now the 100% owner of what were Rene's shares. And so it just shows you that no matter what scale you're at, if you get it wrong, you will be taken down. And it's one of the reasons why I talk about your ego being so important to get control of it. And also just to remember those, those 4 E's that I talk about: your ego, your emotions, the economy can catch you by surprise, and events can catch you by surprise. So you have to be careful. Now, beyond that, what are the other red flags? Well, one of my coaching clients and one of my mastermind members, she wrote to me the other day saying that she's seen a number of things, and it seems like the economy, there seems to be something shifting in the economy. And she said that she had a couple of foreign contractors that arrived to go and work in, and they normally would stay in a house that she kind of, finds and whatever. These guys were on the next plane, like a few days later, flying back home. They didn't get the work that they expected. And various other sort of insights that she had points to some sort of change in the market. Now, might just be local to her, but I also was speaking to a solicitor friend of mine, and I asked him, are you busy these days? And he says, it's been a very, very busy 10 or 11 months. And he said, I'm hoping it'll quieten down now for Christmas. And he said, but the cases that he's a litigation lawyer, he said, the cases that I've been working on do not bode well for your industry. And I was like, oh, tell me more. And he just said, well, obviously I can't tell you much, but he says that there's a lot of clients that are asking me to help them recover money from property people, contractors, things like this. And he said that, normally when there's a big lawsuit that goes to the high court or the commercial court or whatever, it's usually for some sort of a performance related issue. And so, there's a genuine set of circumstances there that, you've got one side arguing one thing, you've got another side arguing another thing. And ultimately, usually the two principals can sort this thing out commercially. Not at the moment. And he says just a lot of people being sued for silly reasons. And he said it kind of points towards possibly there being financial issues behind it. And this would make sense to me, because I'm thinking that a lot of these companies, in the same way Johnny Ronan and all these others, if you're struggling with cash flow, if interest rates have caught you by surprise, you don't have the money, and suddenly you might have started a project and suddenly, you're a year and a half into the project and interest rates are much higher than you predicted, your cash flow has dried up, whatever it might be. There could be signs of struggle and difficulty ahead. So it will be interesting to see. But I read the other day about the UK interest rates, and they were saying that something like 17 million people in the UK are on mortgages that are currently fixed, and that they will be coming out of their fixed rate and going to the much, much higher floating rate over the next 24 months. Now, he said that something like 43% of them have not yet moved to that new rate. And so that sort of also points towards, a lot of people suddenly finding themselves in difficulty, with payments that are much, much higher. So all of this is pointing towards potentially some sort of difficulty in the property market. And I don't know. I think I often take a contrarian view to this kind of thing. And I think to myself that if we are heading into a property downturn, a difficulty, then I'm not saying go out and buy, but I'm saying now's the time that you really need to start studying the market so that you understand it inside out. Now's the time to start building a profile for yourself as an investor. And now's the time to start working on your reputation, your hypothesis around investment. Like if you want to take advantage of lower prices, say in a year's time or something like that, maybe 2 years' time, then how are you going to do it unless you have lots of money put aside? How are you going to get that money unless you have investors? And how are you going to find those investors unless you're building a rapport and building relationships with them? So there's a lot of work there, and I have my accelerator program, which actually helps you with a lot of that stuff. I know a few of my clients that have actually done it. We've been talking about it, and we do recognize that this is potentially the time now to start getting busy, not buying, but preparing for potentially buying at distressed prices that could be around the corner. Like when somebody like Johnny Ronan puts his group into receivership, some of those assets will be sold, and it'll be interesting to see what happens to them. Like they'll be purchased by somebody, and it'll be at a price that is lower than the price that they might have been worth maybe a year or two ago. I'm also working on something, and this will be my final point before I close up the episode, but I'm launching an accountability group. Now, I spoke about this before, but accountability is one of the biggest things. Like if you're listening to this and you are in some way passionate about making money, getting successful, achieving great things, it's great to have plans. It's very important. And the mindset is very, very strong as well. But it's really, really important is accountability. If you do not hold yourself accountable, and if you do not have somebody that can hold your feet to the fire and make sure you're being accountable, like, we all see people, you go to the gym and they spend half the time standing there chatting to friends and stuff like that. They're not actually working out. You see people that kind of talk about the business that they're going to create as soon as timing gets, as soon as timing is perfect, I'll start my business. A lot of people will be out there, they talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk. And so it's getting accountable on that. And so I'm going to be launching this thing. Whenever I go into these sort of things, we usually run them for about 12 weeks. So it'll be 12, maybe 13 weeks. That's a quarter basically. So it'll be starting. What I'll be doing is I'll be signing people up. I'll be doing what I've done before. The way I build my courses is I have an idea and I create a concept, and the concept will be like a minimum viable product. I will have a course structure. I will have, we'll say, like a workshop every week or whatever it might be. And the idea is you create an early bird version of it, and you let people in. They get all these like extra things thrown in for free because they're the early birds. They're kind of like test subjects in a way, but they get to give me feedback, and on that feedback I refine the product perfectly. I will be doing an early bird deal for anyone who's interested in joining this accountability group. It will be like anyone who's done my early bird stuff before, that you get a ton of additional value that later versions won't have. And the reason I throw in all that extra stuff is just I want to know what works and what doesn't. I want to get the feedback on, maybe I throw in 10 different things, but I only intend on actually having 5 of them in the course. But you won't know which 5 to put in unless you throw in 10 and find out which one gets the best response. So that's the kind of way I run these things. If you'd like to be a part of that, let me know. And I'm going to be creating a wait list. It'll be for the first week or first week of January or so, we'll be kicking this thing off. So it'll be the first quarter of the year will be the first period. I'll probably run it again every quarter after that. But for the people who are interested in the first quarter, let me know. And again, those of you interested in the first part of today's talk about helping me fundraise for this little kid that got stabbed and to recognize the heroes, I'd love to hear from you if you have any thoughts on that. So guys, I hope you found today's episode interesting. We'll be back with an interview next week. But until then, my friends, remember patience and discipline. Stay grounded, and I'll catch you in the next one. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Behind the Facade. If you have any questions or topics you'd like me to cover in future episodes, please connect with me via the Facebook group that is called Behind the Facade Community. Alternatively, you will find me on social media. My handle is Gavin J. Gallagher. You can stay up to date with all of my content and the various projects I'm working on over on my website, gavinjgallagher.com. And while you're there, please do add your name to the Join My Tribe thing over on the right-hand side. This will ensure you're kept up to date via my weekly newsletter. All of these links are in the show notes below. That's all for now. I will see you guys in the next episode.